Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everyone, based on your time zone. My name is Amit Chaudhary. I'm your host, and today we are going to talk about a recipe for the Salesforce architecture. And we have a CTA speaker in our group, Vinay Sale. So let me hand over him for his introduction and for the presentation. Hand over to you, Vinay.
Thanks, Amit, and really thanks, Amit, for having such a great platform. To be honest, actually speaking Apex Art is my second time. The first one of the org strategy, and now talking about the Salesforce architecture. So really thank you for having me actually on your great platform. So let's start with the recipe for Salesforce architecture. So you should look at this particular presentation as a reference guide rather than the real project work. The reason for that one, these are the all ingredients that you need to think about for any Salesforce project as such. So we'll talk about in depth around business architecture, application architecture, data architecture, and technology architecture. So to start with, my name is Vinay Sail. I'm, let me move to the next screen. I'm an enterprise Salesforce architect. So I involved into the enterprise scale architecture projects of Salesforce, where normally we work on the digital transformation by using the Salesforce as a technology. So I am a certified technical architect and also holding the TOGAF 9 certification. A quick disclaimer, the content in this particular presentation based on my personal experiences. So when you are applying those during your projects, just be cautious because every project is different and you need to apply a different acumen for each project. So what are the different ingredients that you require? First of all, why you're doing this whole architecture, right, in the first place? And what is the scoping around that one? And then later on, we'll touch base to the architecture principles. And then we will talk about four major pillars for any architecture: the business, application, data, and technology. Of course, everything is around Salesforce. Then later on also we'll talk about some soft skill part of it, that architecture mindset, and also the communication part of it. And later on we can summarize. So let's start with the purpose of the architecture. Why we do the architecture in first place? Why we do not go directly for the development as such? So the one of the main aim for architecture to map the business capabilities to the technology to support different digital journeys of the customer, of the partners, or could be of employee journey. And also to understand the links and interactions between those business capabilities. Once you know the business vision from the business stakeholders, and then you try to map the technology around that one. It is not the other way around. So everything that you do with the technology is to fulfill those business capabilities, to enable those digital journeys. And there are two important stakeholders who get benefited out of that one. The first one is IT management, because in the tech leads or the developers, they will come to know actually the how to go with the detailed solutioning and designing of that particular technical component. Do you require any new licenses, or you can use the existing licenses as such? And also the project sizing in terms of a cost of the implementation and overall change management around that one. So everything is very important from IT management point of view. Second and most important part, why we do the architecture, is for the business stakeholders. Is this architecture taking them to fulfill their business vision in terms of a business capability, starting from zero to growing day by day, months, and go on, and fulfilling those digital journeys that coming across on that particular way. So for them to understanding the architecture, help them, and also kind of a satisfaction for them, whatever the vision, business vision they have put forward, it is getting accomplished with that step-by-step journey as such in the form of architecture. So that's the reason we need to do this architecture. It's very important in terms of a scoping, in terms of a project sizing, as well as to come up with the technology solution. Let's jump onto the architecture scope. So first and foremost important thing for any project work is start with the scoping itself, right? And when we talk about the architecture scope, these are the few parameters that you need to weigh. And I will also talk about how it's get impacted into the Salesforce ecosystem, right? So the first one, to start with the country and regions. So if you know the country and regions, that the one of the first idea for us actually to go with a single org, multi-org, or any multi-language, multi-currency options that you need to select in a Salesforce. Also, it also kind of a reminder for the compliance related changes, regulatory related changes, especially the GDPR or California Act, for example. The next one is the business units. So are you going to have this particular project for the department, marketing department, or service department, or multiple different business units? So that will help us actually the which kind of a capability, business capability. We'll talk a little bit more on a business capability in a few minutes, but which are the different business units in the organization will get benefit out of that project. The next one is the technology capabilities. Here comes the Salesforce, different clouds that comes in picture, MuleSoft as the integration platform possibly. So those are the technical capabilities that comes in picture. That few technology might be already exist in the organization and a few technology you want to plug it to make that whole particular business vision into the reality. Then the business capability itself, you might have a payment capability, you might have the e-signature capability, document generation capability, or it could be a simply a marketing capability or service capability that we are talking about. So we need to think about which are the business capability are in the scope and what is the linkage between the business capability. Next one, from architecture point of view, it's very vital to understand what kind of a products that we are trying to sell. Are they hardware products? So if they're hardware product, you also need to think about asset management. If you are thinking about subscriptions, then you need to think about how the monthly or yearly revenue get recognized around that one and how we are going to model it in Salesforce and how the contract management is going to be work around those. Next one, persona type. So you need to think about, is it only customers? Is it only for the partners? Is it for the employee or it for a different agencies members for which you are defining this whole system? So those particular persona help actually to drive the digital journey for that organization. Next one, you need to think about the services. So it not necessarily that the organization might be selling a product, but also there might be selling a services. But one of the things that you need to keep in mind from a Salesforce point of view, if you're selling a services, you need to also adhere to the service milestones, entitlements, and also need to store the service contract as well. So these are the kind of a initial indicator how the our Salesforce ecosystem will be shaped up. But you need to ask those questions, right question, proper question back to the business. And the last and foremost, out of scope, very important factor that you need to consider in the architecture scope is that you need to know these are the things which are out of scope, which are not discussing as part of the project or as part of the architecture, might be some other team already working upon or already that part is already work already been completed. So make sure that you outline that one and make sure that you have agreement with the different stakeholders on the out of scope items as well. This is just an example what I presented in a previous slide. So here the countries could be USA and France. The business unit could be customer service management. The roles could be the customer, partners, employee, could be as well as the agents. It could be products as well as the services and also the capabilities like a payment and customer service, for example. And that can be enabled by the service cloud. Also, you might require a ERP for the supply chain management as well as for the finance systems. We also have the integration layer and experience cloud for the portals for partners and customers predominantly. Just like quickly moving to the architecture principle. So before even try to work out any architecture, you need to really define the architecture principle. You do not need to define enough from the scratch because most of the organization, they do have an enterprise level architecture principles, but you are carrying forward to the different layers, the Salesforce layer, for example. So here are some few examples, but if make sure that when you go in a project, ask to the organization or their architecture team, do you have any architectural principles that we need to keep in mind when you are working up on the high level solution or design or architecture? It's very important to understand. For example, the one of the factor in this one architectural principle, the third one, decoupling of the system of record from the digital interactions. So you need to think about, okay, we should try to avoid any point-to-point integrations and try to make sure that we have the ESP layer in between, with integrating a data between the two systems as such. Also, one of the principle from a Salesforce point of view that's very, very important, the security stuff comes in. It is not mentioned over here, but most of the organization, they do have to keep the data at a secure location. But in what it translates for a Salesforce is that also provide a minimum access level of the data to the users. Doesn't matter customer user or the employee user. So that the least privilege access that we are talking about. So it get mapped to the what we normally have the standard best practices around the Salesforce as well, but try to make those particular linkage. And once you are working on the architecture and your architecture is based upon those principles, and if somebody says this should not be like that one, then you can point out to the architecture principles and stating that this is the architecture principle has been set by your organization and we are just following that one. And to adhere to that principle, we need to have, for example, the integration layer, or you need to have a shield, for example. All those things comes in a picture, right? So you need to make sure that those architecture principles, you need to get it from the organization and try to apply on your own project architecture as such. Let's move on to the one of the pillar is the business architecture is very, very crucial. Not necessarily that you might be working on a business architecture, but there will be some few folks from the business who are acting like the business architect or the SME into their own area. In a new world, we call it actually a product owner specifically. You need to build a relationship with those folks to get to know the business architecture. What is their vision in terms of translating the business vision into the solution building blocks? You need to get to know, have a rapport with them to understand more, dig out more and more about the businesses, to understand more and more actually what kind of a business processes that is required. And from solution point of view, as an architect, should we think about, okay, let's do first, if you see this particular example, let's have the Service Cloud Foundation first, where we'll have the case management. On top of that one, in the coming phase, we'll introduce the omni-channel with the email, web, CTA possibly. And on top of that one, in the next phase, we'll go with the social channels and possibly survey. And later on, we'll go with the customer portal and chat capability. I'm not saying that every project should follow this one. This is just an example I have put forward over here. But think about, you will go with a customer portal without having a service cloud foundation. Will it work? I don't think so it will work. So you need to make sure that you are educating your business counterpart, which is the logical way of moving forward as part of an architectural runway, right? So which are the things that you need to pick first, which are very, very crucial, like a service cloud foundation, before you top up any solution building blocks on top of that one. The same goes for the revenue cloud implementation or a field service implementation. You need to think about the building blocks in a phase one, phase two, phase three, what might be there, because there will be constraint on the budget, there will be constraint on the resources. So you need to manage the path, what we can iteratively help business in achieving their target goal. Might be we might not do in a one sitting, but we require multiple phases to deliver that one. But that's where the architecture topology that we need to put forward towards the business guys. So please have a build a rapport with the business architects or the business stakeholders to understand the business well and accordingly try to create a solution building blocks. Next, again, the business architecture, but let's have a little bit more business context to understand what exactly need to be done, right? Uh, So from business, first of all, from business architecture point of view, try to understand the business processes. The business processes could be, for example, starting with the code to cash, right? So here in a code to cash flow, you starting the business process with the creating a account, then opportunities, codes possibly, and later on, the business process might be goes into the ERP system or the financial management or also logistics management, for example. So it means there is always a business process integration. And when the business process integration comes in a picture, it means we are talking with multiple systems. That is the initial thought process, how our integrations are going to work. We'll talk about in a technology architecture in a few minutes. But these are the points that you need to understand as part of that whole business architecture with the business process integrations, what is coming up later on. You need to think about, okay, what are the bottlenecks that may come up that you need to solve by talking to the business stakeholders. An important point, the Salesforce, the way the platform it is business operating platform. Most of the stuff is there out of box and you try to reduce as much as customization as much as possible. So also advise the business stakeholders on out of box what is available from a Salesforce platform, for example, omni-channel, uh, lead conversion possibly. So just make sure that you are using those particular capability as much as possible, and make sure that business process is aligned with the strategic business vision. If I just put this particular business context in the Salesforce context, you need to understand these are just example. There can be a number of examples how the lead get converted to the customer. Okay, when you are really creating the community users, okay, so that people can access the portal. It could be self-registration, or it could be when the opportunity get closed, then we are opening up the account for the customers, for an example. When really asset gets created as part of the overall business process, where really the payment get actually processed in the ERP system, or do we need to something to have it in the customer community, the payment processing with a payment provider, for an example. And another important thing is that identify the roles who are going to use the system. The way I mentioned before, this could be customer, partner, employee, or different agencies that working behalf of that organization. It's very important. But these are the just a few stuff that comes in where the Salesforce context comes in. But for an example, identify roles which just talked about. So it means if you know those particular roles, you're already thinking about the profiles, what kind of access in a Salesforce you need to provide those particular users. When I'm talking about a payment processing, you might be already thinking about, okay, how I'm going to integrate with from the community, or how I'm going to pass that in data towards the ERP systems. So all those things you need to think along, okay, in a Salesforce terminology, how that going to be work. But if you don't think from a business context point of view, then it's very difficult actually to also get the Salesforce context. So both goes hand in hand. So just try to use out of box Salesforce as much as possible. Quickly moving to the application architecture. So what is mean by the application architecture? So if you see in the IT landscape, there are always a number of systems, right? It is not a Salesforce that's the only system. You will have the SAP CRM or SAP S4 system or Oracle ERP systems as well, right? What you need to understand, you need to respect each and every system, very, very important. And try to, if you are using the whole Salesforce particular for any particular capability as such, you need to think about, okay, is it something really the Salesforce platform should be doing or not? Okay, instead of doing the whole customization, or the you need to respect the other system. If that particular, you do not need to replicate the ERP system into the Salesforce, right? So that's where the system of boundary comes in picture. So if you think, so let's take an example, the first one, let's start with that one, the customer management. So you might have a existing Siebel or existing SAP CRM system, and you are migrating from that system towards the Service Cloud. So do we require a migration? Yes. So we'll talk about more on a data architecture on that one. Do we require integration? Yes. And which are the capabilities that you required for that particular service cloud, right? You do not want to copy, okay, what we have it in a current CRM to the service cloud. There will be some deviation. So you need to think about what I can use out of box, where I might require a customization, which cannot be avoided, but that's the worst case scenario. So those things you need to think about. If you see the customer portal, just an example, it's a brand new capability in this particular project architecture. Possibly we do not have any legacy as such, so it will be complete no migrations and no integration required possibly. The CTI telephony already have it. Is there any Apex and solution available which I can integrate with the Salesforce? Yeah, so it's scope of integration possibly. For survey, possibly we might use the Salesforce survey, so it's a net new capability, so that's fine. For supply chain management and finance chain management, we are not going to change that one possibly. We'll retain and we'll integrate with the Salesforce possibly. So the point with the application architecture over here, with the gap analysis, you will come to know how much the effort required either to retain that system and integrate, or bring a new net new capability in terms of a license and implementation cost, possibly the apex inch that may attract towards the project architecture, or also complete migration from old system to the new system, and then verifying the each and every capability that get matched into the service cloud. It could be the asset management, it could be a lead conversion, it could be opportunity management, it could be account and contact management. All those things you need to think about. Also, sometimes it's very good to also understand how the old system works. And I'm not saying we need to copy that each and every capability to service cloud, but as I stated previously, we need to use the out of box service cloud as much as possible. So this kind of a comparison really help us actually to perform the gap analysis, which eventually will help actually later on for the project sizing as well. Let's move on to the data architecture. I think if you are already using a Salesforce platform, most of those particular checkbox, okay, you should treat this as a checklist in terms of working on a Salesforce architecture, in terms of a data architecture, what you need to take care of. Foremost and important, the data model. I will not go in each and every box, but I will just highlight the few of them just to respect time. So data model, you need to think about a standard object, custom object, external object, possibly individual object, possibly, and also the relationship between those particular object and also the ownership. Having said that one, it also comes with the security and data sharing, very much important. And if you try to stay with that architectural principle of least privilege, you need to make sure that the proper uses of profile permission set and other different security mechanism that we have it in Salesforce. Also think about the data storage, file storage based upon the number of licenses that you have. You might have a data archiving policy. And also the large data volume might require some tuning of the indexes within a Salesforce ecosystem. Think about the data migration. What are the objects that you want to get populated? You want to put historical data somewhere on the other on-premise data warehouse. You want to only bring the operational data. The think about the sizing. Any automation need to be stopped prior to the migration, and also list out detailed migration step as much as possible. Also, one of the neglected topic in a data architecture is the data governance. I must say that one. So we are also defining the master data management principles, and better to have also the data stewards guiding that whole data governance frameworks, where we say, okay, this is the system is master of data, and making sure that integrations are flowing in the right direction from system A to B. For an example, ERP is the master of customer, then let the customer be created in the ERP and let follow, and that is the master, and then it actually sync into the Salesforce system or other system as such. Same goes for a product master as well. You might start with the journey of creating a customer in a Salesforce, but later on it has to go in an ERP system, because the ERP system is the master data, and also the financial and also the logistic stuff around that one is works in the ERP system. One of the very small thing but very important one is the data quality, right? So you need to think about the data quality, because data quality, if you do not collect the data in a proper way, it will have a direct impact on the reporting and analytics. So that's the reason actually when in the a lot of Salesforce jargon is mentioned about the data quality, having the right pick list values instead of free open text, to make sure that you have a proper reporting and analytics can be done. And also think about a compliance and regulation. Are you going to store any PI data on the Salesforce platform? When particular sandbox get refreshed, okay, how we are making sure that you are masking those particular data. So those are also some important few consideration in terms of a Salesforce that comes in a picture. So I would suggest to use this as a kind of a checklist when you are working on any project in terms of a data architecture as such, and just check that did you cover each and every area or not. I'm not saying that all those points are required for a particular set of project, but having a checklist is always better. Let's talk about the technology architecture, where bulk of the Salesforce implementation sits, right? The first one is the Salesforce licenses. You need to understand what kind of a licenses that we already have it, understand its limits, understand which are the object access that you get it as part of the Salesforce licenses, especially the customer community, partner community, and other different licenses. Very important. Licenses also dictates your file storage limits and also the data storage limits. So as we discussed in the data architecture, so please keep in mind about that one. The app exchange, very important. Sometimes it's better to have the app exchange solution rather than building that particular capability within a Salesforce, and also to maintain later on it's a lot of problems. The project architecture governance, I'm not talking about the project management, but I'm talking about the project architecture, where you might have to set up the architectural review board, so that your tech leads, when they work on the particular solutioning, you can review those particular solution and guide them accordingly. And a part of that particular project architecture, you can also have a Salesforce best practices, design and coding guidelines as such, and that can be leveraged by the tech leads, so that the implementation will be smoother in later phase. Of course, CI/CD pipeline. We are also on a follow-up session coming up from Mira, so we'll talk about more. Every project is different, toolings are different. Okay, there are a lot of vendors in the market. Okay, to help out with the CI/CD pipeline and environment management. Same goes for a test management strategy. A lot of vendors in the market which you can plug it with the CI/CD pipeline. So as soon as the deployment get finished, okay, that test suits get automatic test suite get invoked, and you will get a quick results out of that one. Also, from a Salesforce point of view, you need to think about identity management, especially for the employees as well as for the external users. Most of the organizations having the Azure or other different identity providers. So how we are going to integrate those particular identities. Also think about the social channels for which we have a customer or partner identity that comes in. How we are going to deal with that one. Integration approach will go in a little bit detail of that one in the next slide. Uh, Most of the crux actually for Salesforce lies around the declarative versus programmatic and a system access. And with the Salesforce automation that we have it, flow, approval flow, uh, Apex versus flow, trigger framework. Nowadays also we have a flow framework in place. So how those things are going to be work, right? So if you have those things actually documented as part of a best practice and design and coding guideline that help team to work on those. There is ample of documentation on architect.salesforce.com where we have a lot of stuffs available in terms of a what standard things that you need to do it in a Salesforce platform so that the Salesforce platform can stay on optimum. Regulatory compliance, another important part. The one why I mentioned is the data masking, but also think about, do we require also any specific software additionally, or do you need to also talk to the compliance team specifically on a PI data and making sure that health data not stored in a Salesforce or storing in encrypted? Do we require a shield? Possibly, I do not know, but all those questions need to be asked to the right people and get those particular inputs. So again, for a technology architecture, consider this as a checklist for you to move forward. Now let's zoom into the integration approach a little bit detail. So just a high level, when I talk about integration, it is not necessarily related to the data integration. It could be identity like a SAML or different protocols like a OAuth. It could be also SMTP, the email communication. It could be a marketing cloud connect between a service cloud and a marketing cloud. It could be platform event, canvas, or any other different way by which you can have an integration protocol. List them. The reason for integration architecture is so vital is not only the integration originated from Salesforce, but it also dictates the dependency on other system, dependency on other team to do some integration specific work to integrate with the Salesforce. So it really helpful for you to list down a dependency, and at an earlier phase, you can actually identify a risk of that particular dependency and highlight to the project management, right? So it is very important. Also from project sizing point of view, it's very important to also understand the integrations and effort required to build those particular integration. And we require a specific platform like a MuleSoft, as I stated, avoiding direct integration point-to-point integrations. So also better to have the ESP layer in between. So all those things get clarified early in the project as such. The few architecture consideration, it's not about only about a technology. Make sure that you document the few of the important stuff around architecture. Key assumptions, very, very important to write down and make sure that the business architect or other IT stakeholders get understand these are the assumptions that you are taking. It's not like you have a ample of licenses of Salesforce. There will be some limitations, and with the data storage and everything comes up. So make sure that you rightly put those assumptions in those particular architecture documentation. As I stated with the integrations, okay, identify dependency, not only on integration, but something else, okay, that comes across the project is very, very vital to understand those particular dependency and document those. Risk and mitigation. Do not just provide a risk and run away from that one. If you think for particular risk, okay, there has to be a mitigation need to be there. For an example, if you put a risk that, okay, this particular project need to be finished in 3 or 4 months, then mitigation possibly do it in a 3 4 months, the first phase, and later might be invoke the phase two, possibly around that one. So those particular risks need to be documented and also agreed with the right stakeholders. Another important point is to document the open architecture point. I haven't seen a single architecture blueprint document without open points, because some open point take a lot of time to close it. It could be external dependency, it could be internal dependency, or somewhere else, right? So there will be always some open architecture points, and make sure those highlighted and get sorted out as much as early as possible. Then key decision with respect to the architecture, it could be somebody saying that, okay, for account and contact, the Salesforce is the master system. Document that one. For asset is the master system is a Salesforce. Just document that one. It's very, very important to have those particular decisions, key decisions get documented. So it can be referred down the line of 6 months or 1 year, okay, why that particular decision was taken and what is the rationale for that one. Very, very important to capture that one. And make sure that whatever the architecture that you are putting forward, it's aligned to the technology vision. It is the business strategy and the technology vision side by side, goes side by side. So it means you need to make sure that those particular architecture that you're putting forward is also fulfilling the organizational technology vision. Quickly on architectural mindset. So having a technology knowledge, well, good, perfect, but it's also about a mindset, right? So if you're providing an architecture solution, there will be always multiple solution for the same problem or challenges. Measure that particular solution options, weigh against the business value, write down the pros and cons around that one. Also think about the supportability of that particular solutions, infrastructure impact, scalability impact, all those things you need to think about and put forward in front of forum. Always be assertive. Okay, when I say assertive, it means think about what can be done rather than staying negative. Okay, being an architect, it's very important to be assertive. Okay, and give a lot of confidence to your development team. Okay, what can be done with the technology, right? Because you are a technology master. Think about the business challenges and ask right questions, especially in a business architecture phase of the project, right? Where you are asking the right proper questions to the business guys and try to extract as much as information possible. Play customer journey in your mind. Put your legs into the shoes of the customer or employee who are going to use that particular system. Consider that if the same system, if your end user it's given, will you be happy with that one or not? So that will allow you actually to also walk through that customer journey in your mind. Also, sometimes when you go in a supermarket, think about any process that happened right in the supermarket in terms of a billing or somewhere else. It's all about a customer journey. So just try to put your shoes into those. Just try to put your legs into those shoes. Then envision the business strategy. It's very, very important. That is going along with the technology vision that I talked about. Important part is the Salesforce cross cloud products and its integration knowledge is very vital. And also please make sure that whenever we have that release, quarterly release from Salesforce, make sure that you know the latest and greatest feature of the Salesforce platform. It's very, very vital. Instead of going for a customization, that particular capability is already there in a Salesforce platform. So please make sure that how each and every Salesforce product work with each other, its integration, and also the latest and greatest feature that we are getting from a Salesforce platform. The one of the major thing is the user adoption. From architecture point of view, need to be take care. You can't say that, okay, I just deliver my project architecture, it's up to business to do drive the user adoption. No, you need to think about what are the things that we need to help business to do the user adoption. That is the least spoken point in terms of a project architecture that we talk about, because the project get finished, okay, everybody leaves, but actually the success of the project get measured after the 6 months, okay, because the user adoption takes time to provide the business value to those particular customers. So you need to think about, okay, do we need to think about anything with respect to the in-app guidance, for an example, or something else, okay, and also having a dashboard, possibly based upon the login history, just to think about how that user adoptions, okay, happening right now. That will help to the business. Even if you leave the business will have those dashboards. And the last but very important point, when you're communicating with the business stakeholders, right? You need to use a particular language, particular set of artifacts of the architecture at a high level, but at the same time, you are also discussing or talking to the development team to provide the right level of details of the solution. Might be business stakeholder not necessarily interested in the low level coding stuff. Of course, they are not, they will not understand that one, but the development team might be very much interested actually how it's going to be work with the flow or Apex as such. So you are the bridging gap between a business and a business and a development team as such. So you need to make sure that conscious efforts, for example, one of the architecture diagram, which is might vary at a simpler level, okay, 1,000 feet above the ground, suited for the business stakeholders, but might not be suited for the development team because they might require a little bit more detail around that one. So you also need to come up with the architecture artifact in a such a way that can satisfy the both worlds. I'm not saying that the same diagram will work for both stakeholders, but you need to have a might be 2 or 3 different version or variations of that diagram, possibly which you can convey to the both kind of stakeholders. So that's all on the architecture mindset. So just to high level summary. So when you're thinking about architecture, always think about the business architecture, application architecture, data, as well as the technology is very, very important. These are the 4 pillars. By the way, these are the 4 pillars taken from the TOGAF framework and which are universally most of the architects using that one. Architectural mindset, the assertive knowledge is very, very important. And that will also give a confidence to the development team that, okay, this is something can come into the reality and also help for business stakeholders as a trusted person in terms of a technology architecture. That's you when the architecture mindset comes in picture. And the last but not least, the communication, very, very important factor for you to communicate not only to the business stakeholders, but as well as to the development team. So that's all I have for today. I hope this all those ingredients will work out actually for your project when you are driving your Salesforce architect. And I'm open for any questions if anyone having.
Thank you, Vinay. This is such a great information you shared with us. And let me allow participant to unmute themselves if they have any question from this presentation. So anybody, if you have any question, feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question directly. So I see one question into the chat window. Say, what is the difference between design architect to a partner and client?
Just trying to understand the question from Ayla. So when you say the partner, you mean to say the consulting partner in this case? Okay, the persona type you are talking about. Yeah. So from design and architecture point of view, there is not specific difference, but I would like to highlight a few points. When you're talking about the partners, you need to think about the data security and specifically portals in terms of a Salesforce that you are trying to provide. And most of the client always have their employee, right, actually of that employee from that organization, right? So you are providing the licenses of the service cloud or sales cloud, right? And they will definitely have a little bit more access in the system itself. Of course, that is respecting the regional boundaries and all that. So for partner, it mostly will be the portal kind of access, okay? And for internal one, it will be full blown access. That's the one difference that comes in the picture. So you need to think about also the geographical locations of those particular people, and also think about the if you are using the partner community, for an example, the number of roles and also the data volumes that comes in and which are the object for which you are trying to provide access. So your data security comes in very, very important steps in terms of making sure that you are making a right design and architectural choices. I hope that answers the question. I will quickly take a couple of more questions. Okay. What should be the few steps you will suggest quickly on any use case development? I would strongly suggest for any use case development, make sure that you have a workshop with the right stakeholders and try to work out the digital journey or the business process with those particular stakeholders. Once you understand that particular business process journey, then it's very easy for us actually to come up with the right technology path for that one in terms of a solutioning with the Salesforce. So for any use case development, talk to the business stakeholder, understand the need, and then try to work on that. After getting that information, then work out on the use case development. I hope that answered the question, Ravikant. I will take the next quick one, the last one possibly. What if in the initial phase we do not have entire business needs, risk changing solution, how to handle? So if I'm not wrong, the way I read this one, the initial phase, we do not have an entire business needs. Okay. Okay, so that's where your key assumption comes in a picture, right? That if you do not have that all entire business needs, then when what you are trying to do is to list down the assumptions when you are taking out the solution and making sure that you are taking approvals from the right stakeholders based upon those particular assumption itself. But you need to make sure that your foundation architecture is so strong. So later on, there is some part of the solution get changed later on, you will have a less technical depth. But in that case, the technical depth cannot be avoided, right? But you need to make sure that as an architect that you inform that particular risk back to the business stakeholder strongly, because at the end they are the sponsor of this project and they need to sign off that okay, that they are taking a risk on that one. So that's the question answer to Anish. Okay, I will just take the last one from Ayla. In how much having or not having a DevOps culture impacts in architecture design? It's impact a lot, by the way, because normally all the architecture designs, okay, it's quite easy actually to do the architecture, but the biggest struggle I see in the project is uh, the DevOps culture, because you might have a number of development lineup, but what if you are not able to push that one to the production at the right time, right, when it required for business? Because I saw some project where you develop the features for 6 months, 8 months, but you are still not able to get to the production. So the business value is, on example, in this case, possibly the zero or very less in this case. So I think what you need to do, Ayla, in this case, okay, you need to provide the value for the DevOps to the business, right? Or the IT stakeholder. Let them understand with this one how we can have the faster way to the production, and time to market will be very reduced in this case, right? So you need to have those particular influence, you need to have those discussions with those right stakeholder to create a business case, possibly to have that DevOps is there. But it will not directly having an impact on architecture as such. You can develop the architecture the way you are, you have it right now, but it possibly the implementation could be the waterfall model as such. But having said that one, if you see the modern architecture, the DevOps is a part of that whole design and architecture stuff, where people are pushing for the more and more automation in terms of a deployments and a test automation as such. So if it is not there, it is, I think it's architect job to, I would say, influence that particular non-DevOps culture and try to convey that okay, why it is required to do so.